It was a cloudy morning in New York, and a light rain fell over Brooklyn like a constant whisper. Grace balanced her bag, class books, and a wobbly umbrella as she crossed the busy Atlantic Avenue. The light was yellow, but a black luxury SUV sped through without hesitation. She stopped in the middle of the crosswalk, heart pounding as tires screeched and splashes soaked her jeans. The driver jumped out of the car in a flawless dark suit and an impatient look. "You almost ran me over. Yobius!" Grace shouted, her voice firm even with wet hair sticking to her face. The man raised an eyebrow as if dealing with something trivial. "You crossed on yellow. I was in a hurry," he replied coolly. Grace stepped closer, pointing at the still blinking signal. "Being in a hurry doesn't give you the right to endanger people's lives." She stared at him, eyes unwavering. He wasn't used to that. Ethan Carter, billionaire, influential, used to being obeyed, for the first time in a long while, didn't know what to say. She walked away before he could respond. At that Brooklyn street corner, two worlds had collided for a brief moment and left their marks. He got back in his car, mind racing with thoughts of her gaze, her voice, her strength, and grace. Thought she'd never see that arrogant man again. That afternoon, she had an important interview for a social project in Manhattan. It was a rare chance to expand the community book club she'd created for at-risk youth. She arrived at the mirrored Carter Enterprises building, heart racing, hands cold. The receptionist led her to a 28th floor meeting room, and there he was, the man from that morning, the almost accident, sitting at the table like he owned the world. "We met earlier today, didn't we?" he said, voice flat. "I wouldn't call it a meeting. It was nearly an accident," Grace replied, eyes steady. Tension filled the air. The two other executives at the table exchanged glances in silence. Ethan watched Grace with a mix of surprise and curiosity. She had no idea who he was, but he clearly wasn't used to being challenged. The proposal was about expanding a reading program for teens in public schools. Grace spoke with passion, shared data, and told real stories of students whose lives had changed. Ethan kept his eyes on her, more on her eyes than on the slides. There was something in the way she spoke that disarmed him without asking permission. And even as he tried to remain composed, he was already interested. Not in the project, but in her. When the meeting ended, he walked her to the elevator. "You've got quite the personality," he said, eyes intense. "And you've got a car way too big to run yellow lights," she answered with a half smile. The elevator doors closed slowly, leaving more than just tension in the air. In Ethan's mind, that was the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. 3 days later, Grace received an email confirming the project funding had been approved. She didn't know whether to celebrate or be suspicious, but decided to stay professional. On her first day coordinating the program, she was surprised to find flowers on her desk. The card simply read, "Every beginning deserves poetry." No signature. She knew immediately it was from him. Ethan's presence in meetings became more and more frequent. He listened quietly, but always asked one sharp question at the end. Grace tried to keep an emotional distance, but he was slipping past her defenses without her noticing. Every encounter felt like a subtle battle between pride and attraction, and deep down, they both knew they were losing. On a cold afternoon, Grace forgot her coat. She was about to leave when he appeared at the door. "You'll freeze. Take this," he said, handing her his own overcoat. She hesitated for 2 seconds, then accepted it. They walked to the subway in silence, side by side, and then he asked, "Do you believe that some people meet at the exact moment they're meant to?" Grace didn't answer Ethan's question right away. The cold wind blew between the buildings, and his coat weighed on her shoulders like borrowed armor. She turned her face, watching the city lights beginning to glow. "Sometimes I believe it. Other times I think it's just coincidence with a touch of poetry." Ethan gave a faint smile, that barely visible smile she was beginning to recognize. They said goodbye at the subway entrance. Grace returned his coat, and he watched her as she descended the stairs. For a moment, he wanted to follow her, but didn't know what he'd do if he did. She represented something he had buried long ago, authenticity, and that, for him, was terrifying. In the following days, their professional meetings became more frequent. There were no overt flirtations, just glances that lingered a bit too long, brief conversations between rooms, always with something unspoken hanging. In the air, Grace kept wondering why this man left her so unsettled. Ethan, on the other hand, couldn't stop thinking about her. One afternoon, she was in the Foundation's library, reorganizing books for a new reading group. Ethan showed up unannounced, as if it were perfectly natural. "You always arrange everything so carefully." "Books deserve respect," she replied without looking at him. He stepped closer, watching the way she touched each cover. "You have a rare gift, Grace," he said with unexpected sincerity. She looked up at him, wary. "I hope you're talking about the project and not just trying to flatter me." "I'm talking about both," he said firmly, and for the first time she had no quick comeback. That night, Grace talked to her mother on the phone. She spoke about the work, but avoided mentioning Ethan. She didn't yet understand what she was feeling and didn't want to feed fantasies. Her mother, however, sensed something in her tone and smiled from the other end. "Just be careful, my girl. Even strong hearts can break." Ethan, on the other hand, spent the night rereading reports without absorbing a single word. His thoughts were with Grace. The way she spoke, her serious gaze, and that rare smile. He remembered his youth when he believed love was simple. After his brother died, everything became heavy. And now, she appeared like a light breeze amid the concrete. On a Friday, Grace organized a poetry night with her students. He showed up at the end, discreet, no suit, no car, almost unrecognizable. He stood quietly at the back of the room, listening to teenagers recite verses about loss, hope, and new beginnings. Grace took the small stage and read a poem by Emily Dickinson. Her voice trembled with emotion. For the first time, Ethan let himself feel. When the event ended, he approached slowly. "Thank you for this. I needed every word." Grace looked at him, surprised. He seemed more human, more vulnerable. "Are you sure you know what you need?" she asked. "Right now, I'm less sure of everything, and maybe that's a good thing." She didn't answer, just smiled, a real soft smile he would never forget. After that night, something shifted between them. There was no longer just tension. There was care, small gestures like leaving a hot coffee on her desk or highlighting her favorite author in a meeting. Their connection grew in the spaces between words. One day, one of the students fell ill, and Grace rushed her to the hospital. Ethan found out and showed up clearly concerned. "Are you okay?" He asked breathlessly when he saw her in the hallway. "She'll be fine, but thank you for coming." He held her hand for a few seconds. Neither of them let go. The following week, she began avoiding him, not because she wasn't interested, but because she feared what was growing between them. Ethan noticed and respected her distance, but it hurt. He had never wanted to be worthy of someone so badly, and it reminded him of all he still hadn't told her about his past. Grace felt the same confusion. At night, she reread book passages, trying to understand what this feeling was. With him, she felt challenged, seen, but also exposed. What if it was all a game? What if she was reading signs that weren't really there? Or worse, what if they were real? On a Saturday, Ethan surprised her at a book donation event she had organized. He helped carry boxes, smiled at children, even read a short story out loud. She watched him from afar, almost in disbelief. He no longer seemed like the same man from the black SUV in Brooklyn. And maybe she wasn't the same woman either. At the end of the day, he came closer, sleeves rolled up, hair a bit messy. "That was the best Saturday I've had in a long time." "Don't you have more important commitments?" Grace teased. "Today, this was the most important thing," he said seriously. She felt something open in her chest, like a door she had kept locked. That night, she dreamed of him. It wasn't a romantic dream, but an intimate one. They were simply walking in silence through the city. It felt like words were no longer necessary, and when she woke up, she knew she couldn't pretend nothing was happening. The problem was, she didn't know what to do with the feeling. Ethan thought of her constantly, too. Even surrounded by power and luxury, it all felt meaningless without her around. He wanted to tell her about his brother, why he hid behind contracts and glass walls, but the fear of losing her before even having her paralyzed him. So he did something he had never done before. He wrote a letter. It was short, but honest. He told her about his brother, the accident, the guilt he had carried since he was 22. He left the letter on her desk, no signature, but with handwriting she had come to recognize. Grace read it in silence, barely breathing, and when she finished, she couldn't hold back the tears. She didn't reach out to him that day. She needed time to process it, to understand what that confession said about him, but also about herself, about her own resistance to trust. Because there he was, a man finally revealing his truth, and she knew from that moment on, there was no going back. As she folded the letter, Grace looked out the window of the foundation. Manhattan's lights sparkled like stubborn stars, and for the first time, she felt something inside her had changed for good. There was fear, yes, but there was also courage, and love. Oh, love was beginning to move from theory to reality. In the days following the letter, Grace seemed quieter, more thoughtful. Ethan respected her space, not knowing what she had felt while reading his words. Every morning, he waited anxiously for a sign, a glance, a smile, anything, but she remained composed, as if nothing had changed. Inside, however, everything was different. Grace read the letter every night before bed, not out of doubt, but because with each reading she uncovered a new layer of vulnerability. Ethan had opened up, revealed pain, something men like him rarely did. She no longer saw just a powerful CEO, but a man trying to rebuild himself. And that, in a way, scared her more than it charmed her. On a gray Wednesday, Grace received an unexpected call. It was Liam, her ex-boyfriend, the man who had broken her heart years ago. He said he was back in town and wanted to talk. She hesitated, but agreed to meet for one reason only. Closure. She needed to look back before knowing if she could move forward. They met at a modest cafe far from Manhattan. Liam looked different, more mature, but the cynical smile was the same. "You look good." "Radiant," he said, studying her curiously. Grace stayed cool. "I'm fine." Radiant is a stretch. She wanted to hear him out, but wasn't giving him any openings. He spoke about life in Chicago, mistakes, and unresolved feelings. Said he always thought of her whenever he met strong, determined women. Grace listened, unmoved. Part of her still ached, but not for him, for the girl who once believed empty promises. "I'm not here to get back together, Liam. I just needed to hear you. Now I can move on in peace." Meanwhile, Ethan was getting ready for the company's annual gala, an event full of appearances and fake smiles. But this year, he was thinking of inviting Grace as his date. He was ready to make her part of his world, even if it meant exposing himself. But fate had already begun moving invisible pieces on the board. The next day, Grace found an envelope on her desk. It was an elegant invitation, sealed with the Carter Enterprises emblem. "I'd like you by my side this Friday night. E." She held the card for a long time, feeling the weight of the gesture. It was more than an invitation. It was a sign of trust, of belonging. Grace accepted. She bought a simple but elegant dress and pinned up her hair the way she liked. When Ethan saw her walking into the hall, it felt like the world stopped. She was beautiful, serene, and yet completely out of place in that room. They spoke little during the event, but their eyes found each other constantly. Did she belong there? Maybe not, but to him, She was the only real thing in that room. During the dinner, a woman approached. Vivian, Ethan's ex-girlfriend, gorgeous, sophisticated, with a venomous smile. "I didn't know you'd traded CEOs for school teachers," she sneered. Grace kept her composure, but felt the sting. Ethan stepped in, firm. "Vivian, this is Grace, and you have no right to speak to her like that." The night continued with unspoken tensions. Grace danced with Ethan once, in silence, hands intertwined. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," he said. "But you do have to prove you'll protect me when it matters." She replied he understood, and with his eyes, he promised he wouldn't fail. At the end of the night, Ethan walked her to the car. The driver waited, but she refused the ride. "I need air. I want to walk a little." He respected that, but he was uneasy. He knew something had shaken her, and pretending nothing happened wouldn't fix it. On Saturday, Grace didn't show up at the foundation. Ethan went to Brooklyn looking for her, but she wasn't home. He left a short message. "I'm okay. I just need some time." He reread the phrase over and over, feeling the bitter taste of absence. It wasn't just attraction anymore. It was longing. It was pain. Meanwhile, Liam tried reaching out again through social media. Grace didn't reply, but she felt the urge to close that chapter for good. Deep down, she feared repeating old patterns, giving herself and being left. Behind, Ethan represented a much bigger emotional risk than Liam, because with Ethan, she was truly letting herself feel. Ethan, meanwhile, was confronted by the company board. They said his image was being affected by inappropriate associations. He listened in silence, burning on the inside. How long would the corporate world dictate who he could love? He decided he wouldn't allow it anymore. On Monday, Grace returned. She walked into the foundation as if nothing had happened. But Ethan knew better. He asked to speak with her privately. "I want to be transparent with you. My past, my choices, the risks," she nodded. "And I want to know if I can trust you." He then told her everything about Vivian. The toxic relationship, the betrayals, the manipulation. Grace listened carefully, without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "You carry a lot of scars, Ethan, but I don't want to be just another bandage. I want to be the healing." He smiled, eyes wet. "And you already are." In the days that followed, Grace and Ethan seemed closer, more aligned. Their connection was made of pauses, glances, silences that said so much. But the world around them began to press in, and the media, always hungry for scandal, had found its target. Because secrets don't stay hidden for long. A journalist received an anonymous tip. Photos of Ethan and Grace together. The headline? "The humble teacher who seduced the tech tycoon." Grace was shocked to see her face splashed across gossip sites. Ethan called immediately, furious, "I'll fix this. I won't let them hurt you." But Grace knew this was only the beginning. Being associated with him meant being in the spotlight, something she never wanted. She was ready to love, but not to be a celebrity. She needed to reflect. How far was she willing to go for love? And Ethan, how far would he go to protect what he wanted most? That night, they both slept poorly, in different beds, in different neighborhoods, but with the same emptiness in their hearts. The past had knocked on the door, and the question now was, would their love be strong enough to endure, or would it become just another broken promise? The next morning was relentless. Grace woke up to endless phone notifications and a tight pain in her chest. Messages from friends, curious onlookers, even strangers flooded her inbox. She had become, unintentionally, the center of a media scandal. Ethan was also under fire, from board members, investors, and the press alike. Across the city, he was shouting on the phone with his lawyer. Find out who leaked the photos, and clear her name. But words couldn't be unsaid, nor headlines unpublished. The rumors spread like wildfire on dry grass, and more than ever, he felt powerless. Grace refused to go to the foundation that day. She needed to breathe, to think, to escape the chaos. For a while, she walked through Brooklyn with a cap over her head and a heavy heart. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with judgment. She just wanted to disappear for a few hours, or maybe forever. At home, her mother made tea while watching the news. "I always knew you deserved a beautiful love. I just didn't expect it to come with so much baggage." Grace tried to smile, but her teary eyes gave her away. "It's not his fault, Mom. But I don't know if I can handle all of this. If it's real love, darling, he'll know how to protect you, and you'll know how to stay." Meanwhile, Ethan gathered his communications team. He ordered that the foundation and all staff were forbidden from commenting on the case. He wrote an official statement acknowledging the relationship and asking for Grace's privacy to be respected. The barefoot post went viral within minutes, dividing opinions, but to her it was the gesture that spoke loudest to her heart. Later that afternoon, he went to her apartment. No security, no driver, no armor. He knocked on the door with the nervousness of a teenage boy. Grace opened it, surprised, and they stared at each other for long seconds. "I needed to see you," he said, voice softer than ever. She didn't reply, just stepped aside to let him in. The silence between them was filled with unspoken words. "I'm sorry for all of this, G," he began. "You're not the one who should apologize," she finally answered. "It's the world that still doesn't know how to handle love when it breaks the mold." They sat on the couch side by side without touching. "Do you still want to continue this?" she asked, eyes glistening. "Grace, I've never wanted anything more in my life." She closed her eyes for a moment, heart racing. "Then promise me one thing. Protect me from the world, without hiding me from it." He nodded, pulling her into a hug. It was their first real gesture of affection, and the most needed. There, in the silence of her small apartment, a new pact was born. Not of perfection, but of partnership, and for a moment, the storm felt like it was passing. But the days ahead were still tough. The media continued to exploit the story with sensational headlines. Parents of students in the project began to question the foundation's integrity. Some sponsors withdrew their support, and Ethan had to make a difficult decision. In a meeting with the board, he proposed stepping down temporarily as CEO. "I won't let this project be attacked because of me." The board protested, but he stood firm. Grace found out about the decision online and was speechless. More than words, he was proving who he truly was. When he arrived at the foundation, he found her organizing books. As always, she looked at him with tenderness and admiration. "You did this for me. I did it for us, for everything we're building." She smiled, and he knew he was on the right path. That night, they went together to a local literary event. No gala, no spotlights, no cameras. Just words, stories, and real people. She introduced him as "my friend Ethan," and he felt proud because in that space, he was just a man in love. And that was enough. But fate still had more trials in store. Vivian, driven by jealousy and resentment, approached a tabloid with information from Ethan's past. The article insinuated corruption, favoritism, and cover-up in his brother's accident. It was a low blow, cruel and manipulative, and it hit hard. When Grace read the article, the world began to spin. She didn't know what was true and what had been twisted. Ethan showed up the same day, eyes tired and soul wounded. "I never hid the pain I carry, Grace, but now, maybe I need to let you go." She took a step back. "Why?" "Because I can't stand the thought of you getting hurt. Because of me." Grace fell silent, heart torn between love and self-protection, and then she said, "I choose who gets to hurt me, and for you, I choose to fight." The story took a new turn. Investigations proved the accusations were baseless. Vivian was sued for defamation and slander. The media went quiet, and the public began to change its tune, but within them the scar had already become part of their love. Ethan returned to the CEO position, but with a new outlook. He began investing more in social causes, education, and literature. Grace, now leading a new branch of the foundation, became a national figure. They grew together, not despite the pain, but because of it, and slowly, the world learned to respect what it once couldn't understand. On an autumn afternoon, he took her back to that Brooklyn street corner, the same one where it all began, in the rain, under the sound of traffic. "This is where I met you. Where everything changed," she smiled, "and where you almost ran me over. Maybe the only accident in my life that was worth it." He knelt down right there, with traffic humming in the background, opened a small box with a simple, meaningful ring. "Grace Miller, will you let me love you through every season of life?" She laughed through tears and replied, "Only if you promise to stop at the red light this time." Autumn painted New York in golden tones, and the city seemed to breathe more slowly. After the proposal, Grace and Ethan chose not to rush anything. No grand announcements, no magazine covers. Just the two of them and time. They moved into an apartment in the Upper West Side. Modest for him, perfect for her, and that's where the real test of love began. Everyday life. Ethan traded five-star hotel meetings for nights on the couch with books and cheap wine. Grace learned to share silence with someone, something she once thought impossible. They created rituals, pizza on Fridays, park walks on Sundays, reading before bed, and even on gray days they knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. Love was no longer flight. It had become ground. But no season lasts forever, and the arrival of winter brought their first real disagreements. Grace felt a lack of autonomy in some foundation projects. Ethan, on the other hand, struggled to balance time between her and corporate obligations. The arguments started small, but grew like snowflakes piling up. "You don't have to fix everything for me, Ethan." "Cheris," she said one night, "and you don't understand how hard it is to turn off this protector mode I built," he replied. They weren't fighting out of lack of love. They were afraid of losing what they'd built. And after each argument came silence, but also came the sincere effort to begin again. Grace started going to therapy. She wanted to understand why she still struggled so much to fully trust. Ethan sought help too, realizing he needed to let go of guilt to be whole with her. It was painful but necessary, because love, after all, is also about allowing yourself to be healed. Spring brought new winds. Grace was invited to speak at a university in Chicago. It would be a week away, something they hadn't yet experienced. Ethan encouraged her, even with a tight chest. "Go shine and come back to me," he said, holding her hand at the train station. The distance was good for them. They sent each other simple messages. "Did you eat? Read that chapter? Dreamed of you." When she returned, he was waiting with flowers and a note. "Now, I understand. Loving you is also letting you go and knowing you'll return," Grace cried. And she knew she was growing, not just as a woman, but as a partner. In July, they traveled to a cabin near a lake in upstate New York. Days without phones, without social media, just the two of them, nature and quiet. They fished together, read at sunset, cooked simple meals. It was the first time Ethan cried in front of her, not from pain, but from emotion. This is what I call home," he whispered. With time, they began planning the wedding. They decided it would be intimate. In an old bookstore in Brooklyn, they invited a few friends, some foundation students, and their mothers. They didn't want glamour. They wanted truth. And there, among shelves and the smell of old pages, they promised eternal love. The wedding was simple and magical. She wore a light dress, he a navy blue suit with a crooked tie. Grace read her vows off the cuff, voice trembling. "You didn't save me. Ethan, you saw me. And that saved everything inside me." And he replied through tears, "You are the only truth I know." After the wedding, they kept living intentionally but lightly. They turned the foundation into a national reference, created a scholarship program for young writers from underserved communities. Ethan began giving talks on social responsibility and purpose in business. And Grace became a woman who inspired others to believe in new beginnings. Of course, there were hard days, days when the dishes piled up, exhaustion won, or the world felt too heavy. But on those days, they remembered the seasons they had already weathered together, because real love isn't a wave-free sea, it's learning to row in the same direction. And they rowed, always together. One ordinary afternoon, Grace came home holding an envelope. 2 pregnancy tests, both positive. She sat on the couch, took a deep breath, and waited for him to come home. Ethan walked in, tired, but one look at her face was enough. "You—" She nodded, and for the first time he fell to his knees from pure emotion. The pregnancy was filled with new fears and discoveries. Grace had intense nausea, and Ethan bought midnight ice cream without complaint. They chose the name together, Hope, because that's what she represented, the materialization of a love that had overcome everything. During labor, complications arose. For a moment, everything stopped. Alarms, rushing doctors. Ethan stood outside with trembling hands, silently praying. After hours, he heard the first cry, then saw them both, his wife, his daughter, and he understood that. Real love demands courage. The following months were full of sweet chaos, sleepless nights, diapers, tears, but also smiles and small miracles. Hope grew with curious eyes and an easy laugh. Grace reinvented herself as a mother and Ethan as a father, with tenderness and quiet awe. The home now had a new energy, a new music. One night, rocking Hope. Together on the porch, Grace said, "Remember when I thought we came from different worlds?" Ethan smiled, kissing her forehead. "I still think we do. But together, we built a new one." And in that moment, everything made sense. With time, they began writing a book together about love, new beginnings, and the courage to rebuild. They called it Between Pride and Promises. It wasn't just a love story, it was a legacy, and they knew that one day Hope would read it and understand where she came from. In the final paragraph they wrote together, "If you find someone who sees you entirely, even your broken parts, hold on to them tightly. But more importantly, hold on to yourself, because love only blooms when two whole. Souls choose to walk side by side, and if you can, write your story, even if the world doubts it. Because in the end, that's exactly what they did. Against every cliché, against every judgment. The billionaire and the ordinary woman were no longer labels. They were just Ethan and Grace. 2 souls who met in the rain and built their own sun. Time passed with the lightness of a well-written book. Hope grew, bringing new joys and new challenges. The once quiet home now echoed with laughter, curious questions, and scattered toys. Grace and Ethan learned to communicate through glances and quick hugs between bottles and board meetings. Their love had taken a new shape, more mature, calmer, but just as intense. The foundation continued to grow, reaching entire states. Grace now led a team of women who, like her, had reinvented themselves through education. Ethan took on fewer responsibilities at the company, focusing more on social impact. He was no longer just a CEO. He was a man who knew how to listen, give, and serve. Together, they had become a symbol of real transformation. At 5 years old, Hope already asked how her parents met. "He almost ran me over," Grace would say, smiling, "and I couldn't live without her ever since," Ethan added, kissing her hand. It was a story they told without hiding the hard parts, because they wanted their daughter to know that true love includes imperfection. On a cold night, while Hope slept, Ethan brought a box into the living room. Inside were old photos, newspaper clippings, notes. It was everything about his brother, about the past that had haunted him for so long. "I want us to tell his story too," he said. Grace understood. He was ready to give that pain a new meaning. Together, they created a new branch in the foundation, the Lucas Project, in honor of his brother, focused on supporting young people who had lost family members under traumatic circumstances. Grace coordinated the support groups, while Ethan handled fundraising. There, among difficult stories and daily triumphs, they found purpose and once again turned pain into love. For the Foundation's 10th anniversary, they held a major event at the University Auditorium. Grace was given a standing ovation by educators, former students, and community leaders. Ethan watched from the back of the room, eyes full of tears. She had become everything she dreamed of, and more, and he knew he had never done anything more right than loving her. After the speech, she walked off stage and found him. "Are you crying?" "Aye," she teased. "You make me cry over beautiful things, Grace. That's never happened before." She laughed and hugged him tightly, as if still choosing that embrace every day, because in truth she did. The years passed, but the spark between them never faded. Living room dance nights returned as Hope grew older, walks in the park, improvised dinners, quiet conversations before sleep. They learned that the secret wasn't keeping the passion alive. It was keeping the intention alive, and that they did masterfully. On a rainy weekend, the three of them traveled again to the lake cabin. Hope ran across the grass like she held the world in her hands. Grace and Ethan sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, warm tea in hand. "Have you ever thought what it would have been like if we'd never met?" "I can't imagine, because you're part of every version of me, Grace." At night, Hope asked for a bedtime story. Grace suggested, "What if we tell her ours?" And so they began, between laughter and memories, to narrate their own journey, from the accident to the Foundation, from fears to motherhood, from pain to rebirth. Hope fell asleep before the end, but the story carried on. On their wedding anniversary, Ethan prepared a surprise. He transformed the bookstore where they got married into a gallery of memories, photos, letters, meaningful objects. Every corner told a piece of their love. When Grace walked in, she was speechless. At the center of the room, a new promise awaited her. He looked into her eyes, holding a small velvet box. "It's not a new ring, it's the key to our next home." She opened it and saw an old-fashioned key with a handwritten tag, Chapter 2. She cried, because she knew it was more than a house. It was another beginning, once again, by his side. The new house was in the countryside, surrounded by trees, trails, and peace, perfect for raising their daughter and continuing their work at a slower pace. It was a joint decision to slow down, to prioritize what truly mattered, and even through the changes, their love remained the compass because they had promised, not just to love but to stay. At a dinner on the porch, Hope, now 11, said, "I want a love like yours." Grace smiled. Ethan took his daughter's hand. "Then choose someone who sees your worth even when the world doesn't, and who won't give up on you in the storm," Grace added. Time, always time, began to leave its marks. A few gray hairs, some back pain, shifting priorities. But what never changed was the ease of their laughter. The knowing glances, the comforting silences, their love aged like wine, deeper, rarer, more precious, and above all, true. One summer afternoon, sitting in the garden, Ethan turned to Grace. "Have you ever thought of our story as a miracle?" She smiled, touching his face gently. "No, I think of it as a choice. Because for her, miracles are things you can't control, and love was the opposite." They decided to write another book together, this time about building, rebuilding, and staying. Grace wrote in the mornings, Ethan at night, and Hope illustrated. The cover. It was a work created by 6 hands and 3 hearts. They called it The Promises That Remain. The book was an unexpected success, but what moved them most were the letters from readers, real stories from everyday people who had chosen to try again. And in each one, Grace and Ethan saw reflections of their own path. Their love was no longer just theirs. It had become a lighthouse for others. One night, sitting under the stars, they remembered their first fight, their first dance. Their first "I love you," whispered with fear, and all of it now seemed so small compared to the vastness they had built. "If today were our last, I wouldn't change a thing," said Ethan. "I would." Grace smiled. "I would have kissed you sooner." And so they continued, writing each chapter with courage and devotion. Grace and Ethan were never perfect, but they were real. Through stumbles and new beginnings, they had learned that love doesn't rely on fate, but on the decision to stay every day through every season until the end. It was a rainy afternoon in the countryside. Grace was organizing old boxes in the basement of their new home, while Ethan and Hope baked cookies in the kitchen. Among photos, albums, and childhood notebooks, something fell from an old planner, a yellowed envelope. With her name written in unfamiliar handwriting, she frowned, heart pounding. She sat on the cold floor, hands trembling, and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, the blue ink faded with time. As she read the first words, the world seemed to stop. "Grace, if this letter ever reaches you, it's because I didn't have the courage to deliver it when I should have." It was from her father, the same man she believed had abandoned the family without a word. For years, Grace had carried the weight of his absence like a silent wound. Her mother rarely spoke of him, and when she did, it was with sadness. But in those lines, there was another version of the story. Oist. "I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because illness turned me into someone dangerous." A lump formed in Grace's throat. The letter revealed his diagnosis: severe schizophrenia. It told of the crises, the episodes, the fear of hurting those he loved most. "I thought the best gift I could give you was my absence." The pain in his words was almost tangible. Grace cried silently, as if she'd found a piece of herself again. The letter ended with a plea: "If one day you understand, forgive me, and know that, even from afar, I loved you every single day of your life." She held the paper tightly, as if she could, in that moment, hug the man who had written it, but she didn't know if he was still alive. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat at the edge of the bed, the letter in her hands, her face marked by tears. Ethan woke up, noticed the silence, and went to her. Without saying a word, he sat beside her and held her hand, and that's when she told him everything. "I spent my whole life hating a man who was only trying to protect me." Ethan listened without interrupting, his eyes filled with empathy. Now it all makes sense. The emptiness, the anger that never had a name. She looked at him. "What do I do with this, Ethan?" And he replied, "You do what you've always done. You turn it into love." In the days that followed, Grace began a quiet search. She contacted registries, hospitals, mental health organizations. Each clue brought hope and growing fear, until one afternoon she received a call. "We found a man by that name. He's in a psychiatric facility in Albany." Her heart raced. After so many years, here was a real chance at reunion, but also the risk that he might not even recognize her. She spoke to Ethan, her mother, and Hope. They all supported her decision to go. The trip was quiet, filled with heavy thoughts and fragmented memories. They arrived at the facility on a cloudy late afternoon. A kind nurse confirmed, "Yes, it was him. He's lucid most of the time, but lives in his own world." Grace took a deep breath before going in. The room was simple, with a scent of lavender and stacks of old books in the corner. There he was, white hair, distant gaze, scribbling in a notebook. Grace took a step forward, then another. "Dad?" Her voice was cracked, fragile. He looked up, and for a second, silence. "Grace?" he whispered. As if afraid he was dreaming, she rushed to him without thinking and embraced him. It was a hug full of everything: pain, absence, relief, longing. He wept on her shoulder like a child, and she finally felt something inside her begin to heal. They talked for hours. He told her how he had tried to write, but never had the courage to send it, spoke of the episodes, the fear, the loneliness, and she listened, not to judge, but to embrace. Because sometimes love just needs time to be understood. In the months that followed, they visited him often. Hope met him, enchanted by his strange stories and whimsical drawings. Ethan grew close as well, always with quiet respect, admiring Grace's strength. The relationship didn't erase the past, but it opened the door to a new chapter, and that was enough. In one of those visits, Grace's father handed her another envelope. This one I wrote after I saw you again. Inside, just a single sentence. Now I know I left so you could become light. And you did, and you still are. She placed the letter in a special box alongside childhood photos and Hope's drawings. It was her reliquary of healed promises. She began to speak publicly about mental health, sharing her story. She inspired people to forgive, to seek impossible reconciliations, and her voice touched lives she never imagined reaching. One evening, at home, Ethan said, "You're the strongest woman I know." Grace smiled. Strength isn't about never breaking, it's choosing to continue, even after breaking. Ethan kissed her forehead, moved, "And that's why I never stopped falling in love with you." Grace decided to write a letter back to her father. Not to send, he already held it in his heart, but to keep, to remind herself that healing is possible. In the letter she wrote, "Thank you for leaving, and thank you for coming back. I finally understand." With time, Grace's father passed away. He left in peace, knowing he had been forgiven, loved, remembered. At the funeral, she read aloud the first letter she had received. Many cried. Ethan held her hand the entire time, and Hope laid a flower on the coffin for the grandpa who came back. The letter never sent changed everything. It didn't just heal a daughter, it transformed an entire family, and once again love proved it doesn't follow clocks. It only waits for the right moment, and when it comes, it stays. Time moved on with the softness of a river that knows exactly where it's going. Hope was growing, full of questions, intelligence, and a curious gaze that reminded Ethan of Grace. Ethan, now with silver at his temples, spent his days writing memories. Grace divided her time between lectures, reading, family, and deep silences. Something in her felt like it was preparing for another turning point. One spring morning, an unexpected invitation arrived. An international education institute wanted Grace to lead a global educational project. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. But it meant moving to Geneva, Switzerland, a huge challenge, but also meant leaving everything behind. Grace stared at the envelope, hands trembling. Ethan came up behind her and read the letterhead. He didn't say a word, just hugged her from behind. "This is your moment," he whispered. She closed her eyes, torn between courage and fear. That night they talked by candlelight like the old days. Hope, now 13, listened from the end of the table. "I can study anywhere, Mom, as long as it's with you two." Grace looked at Ethan and saw the same man she'd chosen every single day. She knew the decision had to be made by all three of them. In the days that followed, they walked through the neighborhood as if slowly saying goodbye. They reconnected. With old friends, visited the bookstore where they married, the lake cabin. Every place seemed to whisper a memory, but they all said the same thing. You were happy here. And now they could be happy anywhere. Ethan, meanwhile, received an offer to teach at a European university. It would be something completely new, far from business, close to people. Grace smiled when he told her and said, "Well then, I guess. Destiny's done trying to fight us." He laughed and knew they were ready. They packed in silence with tenderness. They sold the house, donated half the furniture, and saved memories in small boxes. Hope made an album of their best photos. Pues, truth, no one was saying goodbye, just beginning again, because they knew. What mattered fit inside the heart's suitcase. At the airport, Grace looked one last time at the boarding gate. She felt Ethan's hand tighten around hers. "Are you sure?" she asked, eyes misty. "There's only one thing I'm sure of," Antononi said. "What's that?" that I'd follow you to the ends of the earth and beyond. Arriving in Switzerland was full of discoveries, a new culture, a new language, new landscapes. But the same love, Hope quickly adapted and made new friends. Ethan fell in love with the cafes, the books, the slow rhythm of the city, and Grace finally felt whole, woman, mother, professional, and loved. The new branch of the foundation became a global reference. The Lucas Project was now replicated in multiple countries. Grace received letters from places she couldn't even pronounce. You changed my son's life. You made me believe in love again. One day, at a conference, Grace was caught by surprise. At the end of her talk, a young woman stood up and said, "I just wanted to say thank you. You helped me reconcile with my father." Grace swallowed hard, holding back tears. So, the letter I received reached further than I ever imagined. Ethan watched from the audience, proud. She was more than a wife, a mother, or a woman of impact. She was a symbol of emotional courage, and even still, she slept in colorful socks and daydreamed often. He loved her for every bit of it. One afternoon, alone on the terrace, Grace began to write another letter, this time to herself. "Dear Grace, you made it. Not because of titles, success, or headlines, but because you never stopped choosing love, despite everything." She tucked the letter into her favorite book, where only Hope might one day find it. On their 20th anniversary, they took a train trip across Europe. They passed landscapes that looked like paintings, talking as if they'd just met. At an empty station in Tuscany, Ethan stopped and hugged her tightly. "Remember when I thought love was dangerous?" "Yes. And now?" "Now I know. Living without it would be the real risk." At 18, Hope announced she wanted to study literature. Grace smiled. Ethan pretended to be surprised. "You two taught me that the best stories aren't in books. They're in the lives of those who dare to live with courage." And both knew they'd done something right. At home, they created a new tradition, end-of-year letters, not about what had passed, but about what they dreamed for the year ahead. They kept them all in a box, like seeds tossed into the future, and in each one were simple promises to keep saying, "I love you," even when we're tired. One afternoon, Grace had a small dizzy spell, just low blood pressure, but Ethan was on high alert for days. It became clear that life remained unpredictable, but fragility no longer frightened them. They knew each day was a gift, and they were ready to unwrap it together. One night, Hope found the hidden letter inside her mother's favorite book. She read it in silence, tears welling in her eyes, and, for the first time, she fully understood the greatness of the woman who raised her. She wrote her own letter in reply and left it on Grace's desk. "You are my greatest inspiration." The last paragraph of this story didn't end with a period, but with a choice. To keep living, loving, building, because the promises that remain have no ending. They are made of small beginnings, every single day, and Grace and Ethan would keep choosing each other, always. Thus ends, and also begins, their story, not like a fairy tale, but the way real life should be, intense, imperfect, and full of love. They found each other in pain, stayed through courage, and blossomed in the everyday. And if you've come this far, maybe you understand that this story could be yours too. Because love is still the choice that changes everything. If this story moved you, let it echo in someone else's heart. Like, share, and subscribe, because love grows when it's shared.